No me pela la verga, Mencho, y así nomás le digo, aquí, estaba aquí, vengo para acá para Loma Rodríguez, y para ver, bueno, a ver, pues cuánto vamos para allá para Jalisco, donde mi compa aquí, a ver, que no terminé. Bueno, que tengo aquí, a echar un chingazo para allá a la verga,
One of the major tenets of our society is freedom of speech. Wherever you go, the conventional authorities encourage you to speak freely and use your freedoms as you see fit. But if there's one thing we've all been made acutely aware of, it's that overstretching this freedom can come with some significant consequences. Sure, you can talk smack about politicians and public office holders, but when it comes to cartel bosses, you definitely need to tread carefully. In this video, we'll be looking at one of the most infamous cartels of all time, as well as the fate of certain people who apparently spoke out of turn against its head honcho. A history of the CJNG. Before we get into the clips we've got, it might be worth understanding the people we're talking about here. For decades, criminal syndicates and cartels have pretty much held the entire organized world to ransom. These are organizations that conduct organized crime at such a scale that even federally constituted authorities have to stop and gasp. From Pablo Escobar's days to El Chapo's heydays, criminal syndicates have existed and thrived. When you look through their history, you'd be hard-pressed to find any as intense as the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Known to some as the CJNG or the Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel is a criminal syndicate that originated from Mexico. As its name suggests, the group's base is in Jalisco, one of Mexico's major cities. And when you check its history books, you'll find that the cartel's operations have been marked by significant shows of violence and even public relations campaigns. Although reports have shown that the CJNG operates in different fields, it would appear that its major point of focus is substance trafficking. This is an activity that has remained profitable for decades now, and if you've seen the hit Netflix series Narcos, then you'd know that any organization looking to engage in this activity will need to be pretty hardcore. Well, the CJNG is definitely not new to that. The origins of the CJNG date back to the capture of Oscar Orlando Nava Valencia and the death of Ignacio Coronel Villarreal. Both men were high-ranking members of Mexico's popular Sinaloa cartel, and when an event such as the death or capture of a major member happens, it opens up a power vacuum in the cartel's operations. Eventually, the Milenio Cartel, an adjoining faction that comprised men loyal to the original Sinaloa cartel, broke into factions. And of these factions, the most notable were the Jalisco New Generation Cartel and the La Resistencia. Eventually, a turf war began between both factions began. Now, it might interest you to know that the first link of an appearance of the CJNG was in June 2009. Inside an abandoned truck in a residential neighborhood in Cancun, Mexican authorities discovered the bodies of 3 men. Along with their remains, authorities found a message that read, "We are the new group Mata Zetas, Zeta Killers, and we are against kidnapping and extortion, and we will fight them in all states for a cleaner Mexico." Eventually, several videos online confirmed the existence of a new cartel known as the CJNG. According to reports, the new cartel's objective was to eliminate members of rival drug cartels, and it became pretty evident that many members of this new group got protection from both politicians and high-ranking members of the police force. By the spring of 2011, the CJNG had declared open war on all other Mexican cartels. The organization even stated its objective to control the city of Guadalajara, although by the middle of summer that year, the group appeared to have also reunited with its former bosses at the Sinaloa cartel. With backing from their former bosses, the members of the CJNG soon began wreaking severe havoc on other cartels around Mexico. On September 20th, 2011, 2 trucks containing 35 bodies were found at an underpass close to a shopping mall in Bocal del Rio, Veracruz. The bodies were said to have been members of Los Zetas, a rival gang that the CJNG was tussling with. And according to reports, some of the victims were said to have been put through a lot of pain before they were eventually deleted. Even though several forces fought against the CJNG and its madness, the group stayed strong. Interestingly, one of the reasons was that they seemed to have weapons that were just as sophisticated as those of rival gangs and even police officers. Think those were police officers? Nope. Those were CJNG members. Videos like these were regularly uploaded to intimidate rival gangs, and as you can imagine, they were quite effective. And over time, it only continued to grow even more menacing. It was almost like every year from 2010, the cartel was responsible for one massacre or bombing, or some other terrible event. And even though the government and armed forces committed to doing something about it, none of their efforts mostly amounted to anything at the end of the day. El Mencho, the CJNG's head. Whenever you think about some of the craziest cartels in the world, there's one common theme surrounding them. Many of them were ruled by ruthless, mindless men who would do absolutely anything to maintain their hold on power. Well, in the case of the CJNG, this wasn't any different. The leader of the CJNG was a man named Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes, nicknamed El Mencho. This man was one of the most insane cartel bosses of all time. To date, he remains Mexico's most wanted man and one of the most wanted people in the United States. Both governments are willing to offer up to $10 million for information leading to his arrest, a sum which shows just how much the governments are really after the guy. Born into poverty in Mexico, El Mencho dropped out of high school before eventually entering the United States as an illegal immigrant in the 1980s. He had several run-ins with the law at the time, eventually leading to his arrest and deportation back to Mexico in the early 1980s. It was at this time that El Mencho began to work for the Milenio cartel, and he was so good that he eventually climbed the ladder to the top of the criminal organizations. Following the arrest and death of several of his bosses, El Mencho decided that it was time to branch out on his own and become his own man. And this was what led to the founding of the CJNG. As the leader of the CJNG, El Mencho took steps to solidify his position and expand his organization through any means necessary. He took more territories, expanded his control over both politicians and members of the police force, and under his tenure, the CJNG went from being a small offshoot of the Sinaloa cartel to becoming one of Mexico's leading and deadliest criminal groups. However, a significant amount of what El Mencho ended up doing also hinged on his ability to basically shut off all forms of dissent. You see, when it comes to cartel bosses, there's a need to stamp out everyone and everything that poses a challenge to their authority. These men and women understand that power resides where people see strength, and this means that they need to show strength at every turn if they hope to maintain their status. El Mencho understood this, and he didn't joke with it either. Over time, he gained a reputation for being brutal when it came to stamping out any form of disrespect, from rival gang members and leaders who sought to undermine his authority, to even random people who made snide comments about him on social media. El Mencho was diabolical, that it wasn't even a question of whether you wanted to work for him or not. If this man wanted you, there were two options: say yes, or you'd end up suffering the consequences of betrayal. He saw everyone as a potential snake, and he was incredibly paranoid. So at every turn, he'd lash out and completely act irrationally across the board. And that leads us to the meat of what we're discussing today. Examples of men and women who incurred the wrath of El Mencho and who paid the price for their transgressions. El Cholo. Our first entry is a man named Carlos Enrique Sanchez Martinez, also known as El Cholo. For those who might not be aware, El Cholo was the leader of the Nueva Plaza cartel, another highly popular cartel that wreaked havoc on Mexico in the heyday of crime organizations in the country. Interestingly, El Cholo had actually once been friends with El Mencho, The two of them worked in Mexico's early cartel days, serving as understudies to Armando Valencia Cornelio, also known as El Maradona. El Maradona was one of the highest-ranking members of the Milenio cartel, and both El Cholo and El Mencho worked for him at the time. But when El Maradona got arrested, El Mencho worked hard to keep the cartel together, with El Cholo as his right-hand man. Within a year, El Mencho had reorganized his operation as the CJNG. And as a new major cartel boss, he had an inflated ego mixed with paranoid. This didn't sit well with El Cholo, who had been used to being El Mencho's right-hand man and who now found himself losing credibility. El Cholo would take ideas to El Mencho about how to operate or expand the CJNG, but El Mencho would ignore them outrightly. Soon, El Cholo began to give orders without El Mencho's consent. He ordered assassinations and violent displays, all without the say-so of his boss. He was eventually ratted out by the CJNG's chief financial operator, Marcos Hernandez. And the moment El Cholo heard about what had happened, he lashed out at Hernandez, killing him in broad daylight in his car. With that, things reached a point of no return for El Mencho and El Cholo. The boss declared war on his former right-hand man, so El Mencho eventually broke away and started his own outfit. In a dog-eat-dog world like the cartel landscape, organizations thrive by eliminating their competitors. And in the case of El Cholo, things were especially bad because he essentially began to operate as a direct competitor to his former boss. This was absolutely unacceptable. The existence of the Nueva Plaza cartel was essentially an insult to El Mencho, and one he wouldn't have. He immediately ordered a hit on El Cholo, but El Cholo was prepared. He formed an alliance with the mighty Sinaloa cartel, and with their backing, he fought back confidently, believing that nothing could go wrong. Well, he'd be mighty wrong for that belief. In March 2021, the CJNG captured El Cholo. First, the cartel made El Cholo record a video in which he spoke about all the ways he had wronged the CJNG. In the video, El Cholo implicated the top police officers, claiming that they had an alliance to take down the CJNG. Then, at the end, he urged anyone still supporting him to desist from doing so. Otherwise, they'd meet the same end he was about to. Poor El Cholo knew what was coming at this point. But while you'd think that merely offing him would be enough, the CJNG was truly diabolical in what they did. According to sources, the cartel kept him alive for days in excruciating pain. They recorded everything that happened in his final hours, using it as a way to mock him and break him down. Then, after several hours of terrible treatment, they dismembered the former cartel boss. On March 18th, authorities found El Cholo's body wrapped in plastic on a bench at a local tourist center. The body had two signs stuck to it using knives, with one reading, "The Traitor El Cholo." That same day, the CJNG released a video online showing El Cholo's last days. It was a statement, and best believe that the message was heard loud and clear. Illuminati 6. For our next clip, we'll be looking at the moment when someone decided to call out El Mencho publicly in what was easily the stupidest thing he could do. As we all know, we're currently living in the golden age of social media. Everyone's online now, trying to build a community and go viral so they can earn some revenue from big platforms like Twitter and Instagram. However, there's hardly any social media platform that's blown up quite like TikTok. From the days of the pandemic to current times, TikTok's position as the largest social media platform has become solidified. And as more users get on it, the need to stand out remains pretty high. I'm guessing this was what was going through the head of this guy, who publicly called out and threatened El Mencho. Back in September 2020, a TikToker named Illuminati 6 went viral after a video of him literally threatening El Mencho went viral. According to the post, it appeared that someone in his comments had dared him to call out El Mencho and talk smack about him. Looking to earn some street cred points and also rack up views, this kid actually did it.
Mira bien, hijo de tu puta perra madre. A mí me pela la verga el Mencho, aquí si nomás se los digo puro 420, yo no me duermo como el pirata o el chanito de Culiacán. Yo soy inmortal, yo soy intocable y yo soy un pato con el diablo, cabrón. Así que si no sabes de mí, de existencia, yo te vine a mandar fuego, Mencho. Así que no me da miedo decir esto, cabrón. Yo lo digo fuera en cámaras o aquí, cabrón. Así que a mí me pela la madre el Mencho. Si nomás se lo digo puro 420.
You would think that someone who grew up in the slums of Mexico would know better than to publicly call out the leader of the most ruthless cartel and one of the most dangerous men in the world like that. Plus, you'd think he'd at least be smart enough to cover his face while doing it. But you know what they say. Clout is one hell of a drug, and this guy appeared to be riding the wave high. Immediately, the clip got out. Many people began telling Illuminati 6 that this was a terrible idea. People in his comments both mocked him and expressed genuine fear, explaining that he'd get retribution for what he did. Days went by, and it appeared that the guy got back to his senses. He eventually released an apology video on his TikTok account, claiming that what he did was wrong and desperately begging for El Mencho's mercy.
Oye, este video lo hice para el señor Mencho. Para el señor Mencho, pido disculpas, lo que dije no estaba bien, no estaba consciente de lo que estaba diciendo, estaba mal. Ese día amanecí bien pendejo, no me di las consecuencias, me dejé llevar por los seguidores y pido disculpas, se te quiere, a ti y a tu familia. Y Mencho, no me mates, cabrón, yo tengo familia así como usted y pido mis disculpas. Aquí todos cometemos errores y pues Dios está viendo todo eso, así que pido disculpas porque la verdad no sé lo que estaba haciendo. Todos cometemos errores y yo tengo problemas psicológicos, así que acuérdese, señor, que se le quiere.
So basically, this kid went on a full rant, claiming to have psychological issues and even lying that El Mencho and his family were well liked by the community, both of which I'm pretty sure were bald-faced lies, but he told them anyway. Well, when the apology video came out, many in Illuminati 6's comments began to theorize that he had gotten threats or something. I'm not sure about that, but what I do know is that no one knows where this guy is right now. No, really. His TikTok account has since been private, and he hasn't posted any content on there. It's just like he vanished. Did El Mencho and his cronies get to Illuminati 6? Did the guy just stop posting because he felt threatened? Who knows? Still, this is awfully suspicious timing, wouldn't you say? Juan Luis Lagunas Rosales. For our next story, it's time to look at someone who really went over the line and ended up paying the ultimate price after messing with El Mencho. Juan Luis Lagunas Rosales was like many regular boys in Mexico. He grew up relatively poor in the city of Sinaloa, where El Chapo's Sinaloa cartel ran things. These guys were the bloodiest of the bloody, and eventually, Juan's family decided it would be best if they moved. Thus, they moved to the city of Culiacan when he was just 15. As a young child, Juan was pretty impressionable. He grew up poor and desired the finer things of life, but he was never able to achieve them. He also understood the type of life he had been thrust into, one of violence and criminal activity. Still, he knew he wanted to be a wealthy man, and if he couldn't be one, he'd pretend to be one. With the rise of social media, Juan was able to take the fake it till you make it approach to life. And in many ways, it worked. He began getting invitations to parties, and as you'd imagine, he streamed it all on social media. Juan eventually adopted the nickname El Pirata de Culiacan, or the Pirate of Culiacan. And as he became more famous, he basically became more outlandish. He'd post videos of himself in clubs, surrounded by scantily clad ladies and drinking excessively. Now it's worth remembering, this was a kid who wasn't even 18 yet. Still, he didn't care. He wanted the entire world to know that he was the Pirate of Culiacan, and he was ready to live that flashy life no matter what. Over time, Juan's strategy kind of worked. By turning 17, he racked up over 1 million followers on Facebook and over 30,000 on Instagram. And soon enough, he kind of became a bona fide influencer. With his babyface and belligerent behavior, Juan was actually pretty entertaining. in a kind of sad way, but still entertaining nonetheless. Well, Juan would eventually take things a bit too far one day when, in typical fashion, a video surfaced of him online while intoxicated. And as you'd imagine, the guy began talking smack. The problem, however, was that he decided to talk smack at none other than El Mencho.
Papa, yo te me pongo a traer lo que sea la verga. Así que el Mencho a mí me pela la verga. Y si quiere-
In the video, Juan was seen clearly yelling profanities at El Mencho, telling the cartel boss to come suck his you-know-what. Yeah, drunk or not, this is absolutely not something you want to be saying, especially to a man who is one of the most dangerous in the country. A few days later, Juan was partying with a few friends at a bar in Jalisco. All of a sudden, several armed men stormed the location, and they immediately let all hell loose. It was obvious who the target was. And for these men, the mission was incredibly successful. Juan died instantly, sustaining up to 15 gunshot wounds. Authorities were eventually able to identify him thanks to the tattoos on his hands. And while prosecutors were unable to identify the men who offed him, the general consensus was that it was the video he posted a few days prior dissing El Mencho that pretty much punched his ticket. El Chanito de Culiacán. Believe it or not, our next story is actually connected to the last one. You see, when Juan was killed, it immediately set off a flurry of reactions on social media. Particularly, many people pointed the finger at El Mencho, claiming that the drug lord had been behind the viral social media influencer's death following the video that Juan had released. Well, while most people simply pointed the finger at El Mencho and moved on, some people were more brazen in their approach. One of those was a kid named El Chanito de Culiacán. No one exactly knows what El Chanito's real name is, but some have posited that he was perhaps a brother or a friend to Juan. Whatever it was, the dude appeared to have been a fan of the social media influencer.
Y este famoso pendejo lo que hace hoy. Ya. Traigo más hielo ya. Lo que le pasa al pendejo.
When word got out about Juan's death, El Chanito immediately blamed El Mencho for the incident. And in a now viral video, he actually promised to avenge Juan's death.
Me pega la verga, Mencho, y así nomás se lo digo. Aquí, estaba aquí, venga para acá para Loma Rodríguez, y para ver, bueno, a ver, pues cuándo vamos para allá para Jalisco, y mi compa aquí, en la camionetona, que tengo aquí, a echar un chingazo para allá a la verga, Yo no me duermo como el pirata, aquí estoy bien en 100, aquí estamos a millones a la verga. Y así nomás se lo digo, la verga. Cuido 420. Y me pela la verga, viejo, me la pela.
No one knows if this was a real threat, especially since the dude could barely even stand. And all he had beside him was a smaller child also dressed in the same military outfit. Still, the clip was enough to go viral. And it was clear that El Chanito was sending out a threat to El Mencho. Like Illuminati 6, though, El Chanito soon came to his senses. And a few days after releasing the first video, El Chanito released an apology video asking for El Mencho's forgiveness and claiming that the first clip was just done in an act of mindlessness.
Chano, ¿pa' qué dice, güey?
Dígame que disculpa.
Pide disculpa, pide disculpa.
Pide disculpa, Mencho.
Pide disculpa.
Disculpa, compa Mencho.
No están mis 5 sentidos.
Es que andaba bien pedo, ahorita ando en mis 5, ahorita ando...
Entonces está arrepentido. Sí está arrepentido.
Y respeto para ustedes.
Me respeto por viejo.
Well, he might have thought that this would be enough to save him, but that would turn out to be a huge fib. Weeks after this clip was taken, El Chanito's body was found on the streets, bloodied and beaten. According to video references, El Chanito was within an inch of his life when he was found. No one knows whether he managed to survive, but I sure hope he did. Poor kid must have learned the hard way never to mess with a cartel boss, even if he was apparently joking. Fofo Marquez. The final entry on our list is a TikTok content creator known as Fofo Marquez. An all-round creative, Fofo became popular as a singer and songwriter before delving fully into content creation. And like thousands of other people, he saw a lot of fame and prominence by hopping on the TikTok trend early. As TikTok grew, so did Fofo's influence and reach. Here's the thing though, for Fofo, music wasn't exactly cutting it. Let's be honest here, the guy's music wasn't all that great. So, to supplement, he basically began creating content on TikTok full-time. The guy already had the audience, so the least he could do was to capitalize on it and continue making money. Easy enough, wouldn't you say? Well, not exactly. The thing about content creation is that no one likes to get bored. And for most creators, there's always a need to get more outlandish with the type of stuff you post. So, in July 2022, Fofo took things a bit too far after taking 3 of his luxury cars and parked them literally in the middle of a bridge in Guadalajara. Then, he got out and began filming the traffic that was building up behind him. I'm not sure what this guy was trying to do. Maybe to boast that he could do anything because he had a little money.
A nosotros, esto es lo que quiero demostrar, lo que puede hacer el dinero y el poder, o sea, literal lo cerré aquí porque yo...
This caused a massive firestorm online. Fofo eventually had to delete the video from his pages, and he issued an apology later on while also being sentenced to serve hours of community service. You'd think this whole thing would just die down, but no. A few days later, an anonymous message was posted on social media. In the message, an anonymous group promised to punish Fofo for his actions and for disrupting the general peace. Considering the fact that the CJNG is pretty strong in the city of Guadalajara, many actually believed that they must have been the ones to release the statement. Things got so intense that Fofo had to hire additional security for weeks just so he could move around. And while the group ended up not following up on that promise, I can imagine that the poor guy must have been scared for his life. Outro. In the land of dangerous men, cartel bosses are in a league of their own. And even for the deadliest of cartel bosses, El Mencho definitely stood out. For many men who crossed him, let's just say the results were anything but palatable. And considering the fact that El Mencho is still very much at large, I think it's safe to say that people would want to be careful the way they address him on social media for their own good.